Case 1. The Menendez Brothers. On the evening of August 20th, 1989, Lyle and Eric Menendez burst into the family room of their Beverly Hills mansion, carrying 12-gauge shotguns. Their parents, Jose and Mary Louise, Kitty Menendez, were watching television. What happened next would become one of the most shocking and debated family murders in American history. The brothers opened fire. Jose, a powerful entertainment executive, was shot point-blank in the back of the head. Kitty tried to crawl away but was shot multiple times as she attempted to escape. When the shooting stopped, the couple had been hit with a total of 15 rounds. The violence was so extreme that Jose's head was nearly unrecognizable. Kitty had been shot in the face at close range after the initial volley failed to kill her immediately. Lyle was 21 years old. Eric was 18. They had grown up in extraordinary wealth and privilege. After the murders, the brothers left the house, disposed of the shell casings and their bloody clothing, and went to a movie theater to establish an alibi. Hours later, they returned home and called 911. Eric's voice on the recording was frantic, screaming that someone had killed his parents. When police arrived, they found the brothers distraught outside the mansion. Investigators initially believed the murders might be connected to Jose's business dealings or organized crime. The execution-style nature of the killings suggested a professional hit. What made the case stand out was what came next. In the months following their parents' deaths, Lyle and Eric went on a spectacular spending spree. They purchased Rolex watches, expensive cars, and courtside seats to NBA games. Lyle bought a restaurant. Eric hired a full-time tennis coach. Together, they spent close to $1 million of their inheritance in just a few months. Friends noticed the brothers seemed oddly carefree for two young men who had just lost both parents in a brutal murder. Behind closed doors, the Menendez family had been far from the picture of success they projected. Jose Menendez was a demanding, controlling father with impossibly high standards for his sons. He pushed them relentlessly toward achievement. Kitty, once an aspiring actress, had become dependent on alcohol and prescription medication. The family attended therapy sessions together where deep dysfunction became apparent. Yet none of this suggested what would happen that August night. 6 months after the murders, the case broke wide open in a way no one anticipated. Eric had confessed the truth to his psychologist, Dr. Jerome Oziel, citing a desire to be free of a controlling father. When Oziel's girlfriend learned of the confession, she contacted police. The recordings of those therapy sessions became crucial evidence. Lyle and Eric Menendez were arrested in March 1990. The brothers who had played the role of grieving sons so convincingly were now facing capital murder charges. The question was no longer who killed Jose and Kitty Menendez, but why. The trials that followed would captivate the nation. The first trial, which began in 1993, featured separate juries for each brother, but was conducted in the same courtroom. The defense presented a shocking narrative. The brothers claimed they had endured years of sexual, emotional, and physical abuse at the hands of their father, with their mother complicit through her silence and failure to protect them. They testified that on the night of the murders, they believed their parents were going to kill them to prevent the abuse from being exposed. The defense argued this was not premeditated murder, but rather an act of fear and desperation. Prosecutors painted a very different picture. They argued the brothers were motivated by pure greed, by hatred, and by a desire to receive their father's multi-million-dollar estate after being threatened with disinheritment. The prosecution pointed to the brothers' lavish spending, their apparent lack of remorse, and the calculated way they had disposed of evidence and established alibis. They noted that Eric had purchased the shotguns days before the murders. This was not self-defense, prosecutors insisted. This was cold-blooded murder for financial gain. The abuse allegations divided the juries along gender lines. Female jurors were more likely to believe the brothers' claims and to view the killings as a response to years of trauma. male jurors pushed for first-degree murder convictions. After months of deliberation, both juries deadlocked. The first trial ended in a mistrial in January 1994. The second trial began in 1995, with significant differences. This time, there was only one jury for both brothers. The judge limited testimony about the alleged abuse, ruling that much of the evidence presented in the first trial would not be allowed. The defense was not permitted to argue that the killings constituted manslaughter based on imperfect self-defense. The brothers' own testimony was constrained. Media coverage was banned from the courtroom. Without cameras, without the extensive abuse testimony, and with a single jury evaluating both brothers together, the outcome changed dramatically. On March 20, 1996, Lyle and Eric Menendez were convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder with special circumstances for lying in wait. The jury also convicted them of conspiracy to murder. Both brothers were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The Menendez case raised difficult questions that continue to spark debate decades later. The evidence of abuse was substantial. Family members testified to witnessing Jose's cruelty and controlling behavior. Photographs were presented showing the brothers as children in circumstances that suggested inappropriate conduct. Mental health experts testified about the psychological impact of long-term sexual abuse. Yet the prosecution successfully argued that even if abuse occurred, it did not justify or explain the calculated manner in which the brothers carried out the murders, destroyed evidence, lied to police, and spent their inheritance. Some viewed the brothers as victims who finally fought back against their abuser in the only way they believed they could. Others saw them as privileged young men who murdered their parents in cold blood for money and freedom, then manipulated the legal system with false abuse allegations. The gender split in the first jury reflected these competing narratives. The question was never simply whether the brothers committed the murders. The question was whether their past suffering, if it existed, could transform premeditated killing into something else. The brothers have remained imprisoned for nearly 3 decades. They were housed in separate facilities for many years, unable to see each other. In 2018, they were reunited at the same prison in San Diego. Both have married while incarcerated. Both have expressed remorse, though they continue to maintain that the abuse they described was real. In recent years, the case has experienced a resurgence in public attention. Documentaries and dramatizations have re-examined the evidence and the abuse allegations with fresh eyes. In 2024, the Los Angeles District Attorney recommended resentencing for the brothers, citing new evidence and evolving understanding of trauma's impact on abuse victims. The recommendation acknowledged that while the murders were not justified, the brothers' youth at the time and the abuse they may have suffered warranted reconsideration of their sentences. The Menendez case remains one of the most polarizing family murders in American history. It forced uncomfortable conversations about abuse, about wealth and privilege, about the criminal justice system's handling of trauma, and about how much a person's past can explain their most terrible actions. The mansion on Elm Drive, where Jose and Kitty Menendez spent their final moments, still stands. The family that lived there is gone. What remains is a story that refuses simple answers, that challenges our assumptions about victims and villains, and that continues to ask whether the line between the two can ever truly be clear. Case 2. The Carr Brothers. In December 2000, 2 brothers arrived in Wichita, Kansas, and embarked on a week-long crime spree that would become known as the Wichita Massacre. Reginald Carr, 23, and Jonathan Carr, 20, had lengthy criminal records before they ever set foot in the city. What they carried out over 7 days would terrorize an entire community and result in 5 deaths. The violence began on December 8th. Andrew Schreiber, a 23-year-old assistant baseball coach, stopped at a convenience store. When he returned to his car, the Carr brothers materialized beside him. They held him at gunpoint and forced him to drive around the city, stopping at multiple ATMs until his card could withdraw no more money. Schreiber survived, but he had no idea he was only the first. 3 days later, on December 11th, Anne Walenta was returning home from orchestra practice. The 55-year-old cellist and librarian for the Wichita Symphony pulled into her driveway. One of the brothers approached her vehicle, claiming he needed help. When she rolled down her window, he opened fire. Walenta was shot 3 times. A neighbor heard her car horn blaring and called 911. Before she died 3 weeks later in the hospital, Walenta was able to describe her attackers to police. Investigators realized the same suspects were responsible for both crimes. Then, for 3 days, the city was quiet. On the night of December 14th, the Carr brothers broke into a home at 12727 East Birchwood Drive. Inside were 5 young people. Brad Hoika, 27, worked as a director of finance. Heather Muller, 25, taught preschool at a Catholic school and planned to become a nun. Aaron Sander, 29, had recently left his job to study for the priesthood. Jason Beaufort, 26, was a high school science teacher and football coach. With Jason was his girlfriend, a 25-year-old woman whose identity has been protected because of what she endured that night. She would later be known in court documents only as H.G., armed with handguns and golf clubs. The brothers forced their way inside. They herded all 5 victims into a single room and demanded valuables. The terror that followed would last for hours. The brothers forced the victims to strip naked. They made them perform sexual acts on one another while the attackers watched and gave orders. They raped both women repeatedly. They forced the 3 men to have sex with the women under threat of death. Between the assaults, the brothers took the victims one by one to ATMs across the city, maxing out their debit cards. They withdrew nearly $2,000. Back at the house, they discovered an engagement ring hidden in a popcorn tin under one of the beds. That was how H.G. learned Jason had been planning to propose to her. As the night wore on, the brothers forced all 5 victims into a vehicle. They drove to a snow-covered soccer field on the outskirts of Wichita. The temperature was well below freezing. The victims were ordered to kneel in the snow. Then Reginald and Jonathan Carr shot each person execution-style in the head. After the shooting, they ran over the bodies with their truck to ensure there were no survivors. But there was a survivor. H.G. had been shot in the head, but the bullet had deflected off a hair clip. She was gravely wounded, but alive. Naked and bleeding, she waited until she was certain the brothers had left. Then she stood up in the freezing darkness and began walking. She stumbled nearly a mile through snow and sub-freezing temperatures, climbing over a barbed wire fence, following the distant glow of a cross lit in Christmas lights. When she finally reached a house and the residents opened their door, she was barely conscious. She told them her friends had been shot. Then she grabbed the phone from them. She needed to explain what had happened herself, she said, before she died. H.G.'s survival and her testimony would become crucial to the case. Her description of the attackers and the night's events gave investigators the information they needed. The bodies of Jason Beaufort, Aaron Sander, Heather Muller, and Brad Hoika were found at the soccer field. All 4 were young people with their entire lives ahead of them. Jason had been about to propose. Heather had devoted herself to teaching children and her faith. Aaron had been preparing for the priesthood. Brad had built a successful career in finance. They were, as police would later say, the salt of the earth. The Carr brothers were captured the next day. Police found them in a wooded area covered in mud and blood. They were arrested without incident. Inside the victim's home, investigators found evidence of the hours of terror the 5 friends had endured. The brothers had even stolen appliances, bedding, and other household items before leaving the house that final time. The case went to trial in 2002. The proceedings lasted 3 weeks. H.G. took the stand and relived the nightmare, describing in painful detail what had been done to her and her friends. Her testimony was critical. The brothers were charged with more than 100 counts between them, including capital murder, aggravated kidnapping, robbery, rape, and animal cruelty for killing the victim's dog. The jury convicted Reginald Carr on 50 counts and Jonathan Carr on 43 counts. Both were sentenced to death in October 2002. The verdicts brought some measure of justice, but nothing could restore what had been taken. 4 promising lives had been extinguished. H.G. had survived, but she had lost her fiancé and watched her friends die. The Wichita community had been shaken to its core. The aftermath of the Wichita massacre extended far beyond the courtroom. Gun sales in the city increased dramatically. Residents installed new locks and home security systems. Parents held their children closer. The randomness of the crime was perhaps the most terrifying aspect. The victims had been chosen simply because they were home that night. They had done nothing to invite this horror into their lives. It was pure chance, pure evil. The case also sparked debate about media coverage. Some observers noted that the national media gave relatively little attention to the Wichita massacre compared to other high-profile crimes. Questions were raised about whether the racial dynamics of the case influenced coverage decisions. The Carr brothers were black. Their victims were white. Some argued the media downplayed the story to avoid inflaming racial tensions. Others pointed to a different double standard, noting that 8 days before the massacre, 4 young black people were murdered in Wichita by another black man, and that crime received almost no media attention at all. The legal process for the Carr brothers has continued for more than 2 decades. In 2014, the Kansas Supreme Court upheld their murder convictions but vacated their death sentences, ruling that the brothers should have had separate sentencing hearings. The U.S. Supreme Court reversed that decision in 2016, reinstating the death sentences. The case returned to the Kansas Supreme Court, which in 2022 again affirmed the death sentences and rejected more than 20 penalty phase issues raised by the defense. Both brothers remain on death row at the El Dorado Correctional Facility. Kansas has not executed anyone since 1965, when 2 men were hanged on the same day. Whether the Carr brothers will ever face execution remains uncertain. Their attorneys continue to file appeals, arguing issues ranging from jury selection to claims of ineffective counsel. The legal proceedings have stretched across multiple courts and multiple decades, with no end clearly in sight. For the families of the victims, the waiting has been excruciating. They have attended hearing after hearing, reliving the loss over and over as defense attorneys argue for new trials or resentencing. They have watched as the brothers blamed each other for the crimes, as they claimed mental illness and abuse, as they sought any avenue to escape the consequences of what they did. The families have had to endure not only the original trauma, but its endless echo through the justice system. H.G., the survivor, has had to rebuild her life, knowing she will always carry that night with her. She walked through snow and climbed over barbed wire to get help, displaying extraordinary courage when most people would have simply given up. Her testimony put the Carr brothers behind bars. Her survival is a testament to the human will to live even in the face of unimaginable horror. The Wichita Massacre remains one of the most brutal crime sprees in Kansas history. It raised questions about evil, about randomness, about how 2 people can inflict such suffering on strangers for no reason beyond opportunity and cruelty. Former FBI Special Agent Michael Tabman, who analyzed the case, noted that trying to find a motive would be futile. There was no satisfying answer to the question of why. The motivation, he concluded, was simply evil. The case also serves as a reminder of how fragile safety can be, how quickly an ordinary evening can turn into a nightmare. The 5 friends gathered at the Birchwood Drive home were doing nothing unusual. They were spending time together in a safe, familiar place. Within hours, 4 of them were dead, and 1 was fighting for her life in the snow. No amount of caution or preparation could have predicted or prevented what happened to them. The schools and organizations connected to the victims have worked to honor their memories. St. Thomas Aquinas Catholic School, where Heather Muller taught, established the Heather Muller Love of Faith Award, given annually to an 8th grade student. The award ensures that Heather's dedication to children and her faith continues to inspire. Jason, Aaron, Brad, and Heather are remembered not for how they died, but for how they lived, for the goodness they brought to the world, for the potential that was stolen from them and from everyone who would have been touched by their continued presence. The Carr brothers took 4 lives that December night. They devastated families. They traumatized a community. They created wounds that will never fully heal. And they proved that sometimes the worst crimes are not the result of complex circumstances or understandable motivations. Sometimes cruelty is simply cruelty. Horror is simply horror. And evil walks into an ordinary home on an ordinary night and destroys everything it touches. Case 3. The Bever Brothers. On the night of July 22, 2015, 18-year-old Robert Bever and his 16-year-old brother Michael armed themselves with knives they had been secretly stockpiling in their Broken Arrow, Oklahoma home. They had spent more than a year planning what would happen next. The goal was simple. They wanted to be famous. They wanted Wikipedia pages. They wanted media coverage. And they believed that murdering their entire family would be the first step toward achieving a body count of 500 people. The attack began just after 11 p.m. The brothers' first target was their 13-year-old sister, Crystal. She was talking with Robert and Michael about doing the dishes when Robert suddenly grabbed her from behind and slashed her throat. Crystal fought back as he plunged the knife into her abdomen and arms. She managed to break away and ran for the front door, but one of the brothers dragged her back inside. Crystal slipped in and out of consciousness, bleeding heavily from multiple stab wounds. Upstairs, the boy's mother, April Bever, heard the commotion. The 44-year-old rushed to help her daughter. She was met by Robert, who unleashed a frenzy of knife strikes. April suffered at least 48 wounds, more than investigators had ever seen on a single victim. The attack was sustained and brutal. While this was happening, Crystal somehow crawled away, trying desperately to reach her younger siblings and warn them. The brothers moved through the house room by room. Their father, David Bever, 52, was stabbed 28 times and suffered blunt force injuries across his body. But the most disturbing aspect of the murders was how the brothers hunted their younger siblings. 12-year-old Daniel managed to hide in a home office and called 911. His faint voice could be heard telling the dispatcher that his brother was attacking the family. Michael used a cruel deception to reach him. He claimed that Robert was trying to stab him and that he needed Daniel's help. When Daniel opened the door, Michael stepped aside and told Robert, "He's all yours." 7-year-old Christopher and 5-year-old Victoria had locked themselves in a bathroom. Michael used the same trick, pretending he needed protection from Robert. The children, trusting their brother, unlocked the door. Christopher was stabbed 7 times. Victoria, the youngest victim, was stabbed 18 times. The brothers showed no hesitation, no mercy. Captain Brandon Teener of the Broken Arrow Police Department was the first officer to arrive. He saw blood on the sidewalk and front step. From inside the house, he heard a faint voice saying, "Help me." It was Crystal. Despite her catastrophic injuries, she was conscious. When Teener reached her, she was able to do something extraordinary. She identified her attackers. "My brothers did this," she told him, "Robert and Michael Bever." As police searched the rest of the house, they found the bodies of David and April Bever and 3 of their children. The scene was horrific. Blood was everywhere. The victims had suffered a combined total of 141 stab wounds. But then, in a room above the garage, officers found a miracle. The Bevers' 2-year-old daughter, Autumn, was still asleep in her crib. Somehow, she had been spared or forgotten. She was completely unharmed. By that time, Robert and Michael had fled out the back of the house. A police K-9 tracked them to a wooded area behind the property. They were found covered in mud and blood, their clothing torn. In police photos, bits of flesh were visible on their clothes. They were arrested without resistance. What investigators discovered in the days that followed was deeply disturbing. The brothers had been planning the murders for over a year. They had researched serial killers extensively. Robert admired mass murderers and had compiled detailed information about their methods. He told detectives that killing more than one person would make him like a god. The brothers had stockpiled knives, purchased body armor, and acquired tactical equipment. They had even planned to make 2 videos after the murders. One would show their families' bodies and would be seen only by police and prosecutors. The other would be edited to remove the bodies so it could be posted on YouTube. The plan did not end with their family. Robert and Michael intended to steal the family car and drive across the country, randomly selecting victims to shoot and kill. They wanted to reach a body count of at least 50 people. Robert's ultimate goal was 500. They believed this would make them legendary. They wanted to be feared. They wanted to be remembered. During his police interview, Michael appeared oddly calm. He told detectives he had stabbed his youngest brother and his mother. When asked how he felt about it hours later, he said he did not want to think about it. In his jail cell, Michael kept a journal filled with crayon drawings that a deputy later described as morbid and violent. One entry read, "Once upon a time, there were 2 brothers named Michael and Robert. They hated their family, so they killed them. The end." Robert was equally detached. Detective Eric Bentz, who questioned both brothers, recalled that Robert laughed or chuckled on several occasions while describing the attacks. He appeared relaxed, even mildly excited. When discussing his plan to achieve fame through mass murder, Robert showed no remorse, no recognition that what he was describing was monstrous. Detective Rihanna Russell noted that the brothers had planned the killings nightly. They wanted a Wikipedia page, she said. They wanted media coverage. The Bever family had been deeply isolated. The children were homeschooled and rarely interacted with neighbors or other children. Some neighbors did not even know the full names of the family members until the medical examiner released them after the murders. Those who did encounter Robert and Michael reported strange and unsettling behavior, but nothing that clearly predicted the horror to come. Defense attorneys would later argue that the father, David Bever, had been physically and verbally abusive. Robert claimed both parents were abusive and often talked about people they hated, referring to biblical Armageddon as retribution. But even if abuse occurred, it did not explain the brothers' desire for fame, their detailed planning, or their intent to kill far beyond their own family. Crystal Bever survived her injuries and eventually testified against her brothers. Her courage was extraordinary. She had been the first victim, attacked without warning by her own brothers. She had fought back, crawled away while bleeding from her throat and abdomen, and still managed to identify her attackers to police. Without her survival and her testimony, the case might have unfolded very differently. Robert Bever pleaded guilty in 2016, avoiding trial. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Michael Bever went to trial in 2018. Prosecutors presented the notebook entries, the police interviews, and the detailed evidence of planning. They played the 911 call from the night of the attack, during which Crystal could be heard whispering for help and saying, "Michael, please don't murder me," before the phone went silent. After more than 5 hours of deliberation, the jury convicted Michael of 5 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of assault and battery with intent to kill. At least half the jurors openly cried as the verdict was read. Michael attempted to sit down and fell to the floor, requiring a deputy's assistance to get back into his seat. He was sentenced to life without parole. The question that haunts the case is why. What drives two teenagers to meticulously plan the murder of their entire family for over a year? What makes them believe that killing will bring them the fame and recognition they crave? Robert and Michael Bever were not impulsive. They were not acting in a moment of rage. They stockpiled weapons. They searched tactics. They created a detailed plan that extended far beyond their family home. They envisioned themselves as legendary killers. Detective Bentz, who spent hours interviewing the brothers, described them simply as evil. Captain Tenaire agreed. The explanation for why they did this can be summed up in evil, he said. They had something evil in them, and they let it out that night. The isolation of the Bever family may have contributed. The lack of outside contact, the absence of teachers or peers who might have noticed warning signs, the echo chamber of two brothers reinforcing each other's darkest fantasies. But isolation alone does not create killers. Something deeper and more disturbing was at work. The surviving sisters were adopted after the murders. Crystal, by all accounts, has done remarkably well for herself. She carries scars, both physical and psychological, that will never fully fade. But she survived. She testified. She helped ensure her brothers would never be free again. Autumn, the toddler who slept through the nightmare, was too young to remember. She was given a chance at a life her older siblings never got to live. The Bever family murders remain the deadliest crime in Broken Arrow's history until a murder-suicide in 2022 that killed 8 people. The case revealed the dangers of extreme isolation, the role of the internet in feeding violent fantasies, and the terrifying reality that family members can become predators. Robert and Michael Bever destroyed their family not because of any immediate threat or provocation, but because they wanted to be famous. They wanted to be remembered. They believed that taking lives would elevate them to a status they could never achieve through any legitimate means. 10 years have passed since that July night. Robert Bever remains at Oklahoma State Penitentiary. Michael Bever is housed at Lexington Correctional Center. They will never be released. They achieved a kind of fame, but not the kind they imagined. They are not legendary killers. They are not gods. They are two brothers who murdered 5 members of their own family, who destroyed the lives of the 2 sisters who survived, and who proved that the desire for notoriety can be as deadly as any weapon. The house on Magnolia Court, where the Bever family lived and died, stands as a reminder that evil can grow quietly behind closed doors, that isolation can nurture the darkest impulses, and that the pursuit of fame can twist into something unspeakable. Case 4. David and Louise Turpin. On January 14, 2018, a 17-year-old girl climbed out of a window of her family's home in Perris, California. She had been planning this escape for more than 2 years. In her hand was a deactivated cell phone she had secretly taken from the house. She walked some distance from the home, her hands shaking, and dialed 911. When the dispatcher answered, she spoke quickly. "My parents are abusive," she said. "My 2 little sisters right now are chained up." The dispatcher asked her to repeat what she had said. "They're chained up," the girl said again, "chained up to their bed." Officers from the Riverside County Sheriff's Department arrived at the home and knocked on the door. David and Louise Turpin answered. The deputies stated they were there for a welfare check. Inside the house, they found a scene that defied comprehension. 13 children and young adults, ranging in age from 2 to 29, had been held captive by their own parents for decades. The conditions were so horrific that investigators would later describe the case as extraordinary, even by the standards of severe abuse cases. The children were severely malnourished. The oldest, a 29-year-old woman named Jennifer, weighed only 82 pounds. Officers initially believed she was a teenager because of her size and appearance. In fact, several of the adult children appeared to be much younger than they were. A 12-year-old child had an arm circumference equivalent to that of a 4-month-old baby. The victims had been systematically starved for years. Their parents would bake pies and place them on the counter, forbidding the children from eating them. They would buy toys and leave them in boxes, never allowing the children to open or play with them. The abuse extended far beyond starvation. David and Louise Turpin had shackled some of their children to their beds with chains and padlocks for weeks or even months at a time. The restraints had initially been ropes, used as punishment. But when one child managed to escape the ropes, the parents switched to chains. The children had no access to bathrooms while restrained. They were forced to lie in their own waste. They were allowed to shower only once a year. The smell inside the house was sometimes so overwhelming that the 17-year-old who eventually escaped said she could barely breathe. None of the children had seen a doctor in more than 4 years. None had ever visited a dentist. They had been kept almost entirely inside the house, with only occasional family outings. Neighbors said they rarely saw the children and were shocked to learn there were 13 of them. The kids did not come out very often, neighbors reported. When they did appear, it was usually all together, dressed identically. The family would sometimes travel to Las Vegas, where David and Louise renewed their vows in Elvis-themed ceremonies. Videos from these trips showed the children in matching outfits, the girls in pink dresses with white tights and heels, the boys in dark suits with white shirts and red ties. They stood still and silent while their parents smiled for the camera. The Turpin children lacked basic knowledge of the world. When police arrived, some appeared to have difficulty understanding what was happening. They seemed unfamiliar with concepts that most people take for granted. Jordan, the 17-year-old who escaped, did not know what the word medication meant. Some of the children did not know who police were. Their vocabulary was limited. They had been completely isolated from society, denied education, denied social interaction, denied any chance to develop normally. David Allen Turpin had been a computer engineer who graduated from Virginia Tech and worked for companies like Lockheed Martin and Northrop Grumman. Louise Turpin was a homemaker. They had married young and had 13 children over the years. To the outside world, they presented themselves as a large, religious, homeschooling family. David filed paperwork with the California Department of Education claiming the children were being educated in a private school. The paperwork was a lie. The children received virtually no education. They were prisoners in their own home. The abuse had started as neglect years earlier when the family lived near Fort Worth, Texas. It intensified significantly after they moved to California. The torture became systematic. David and Louise worked together, both fully participating in the cruelty. There was no dynamic where one parent was the abuser and the other was powerless. They were partners in what they did to their children. They made decisions together about punishments, about restrictions, about how much suffering they would inflict. Prosecutors noted that the children were punished for minor infractions. They would get in trouble for things like playing with water while washing their hands. The consequences were severe and prolonged. Being chained to a bed for months, being denied food for days, being isolated even from each other. The parents controlled every aspect of their children's existence. Only one child, a son, was allowed to leave the home to attend classes at a community college, and even then, he was always accompanied by his mother. David and Louise's own families were stunned when the truth came out. Louise's sister said the family had always given the impression they were living the perfect life. Louise would tell her about trips to Las Vegas and vacations to Disneyland. There were photos, always photos, of everyone smiling. No one suspected that behind those images was a house of horrors where children were being systematically destroyed. When authorities arrested David and Louise Turpin, bail was set at $12 million for David and $9 million for Louise. They remained in custody. Prosecutors charged them with 12 counts of torture, 12 counts of false imprisonment, 7 counts of abuse of a dependent adult, and 6 counts of child abuse. David received an additional charge related to a lewd act on a child under 14. The case moved through the legal system. Louise's attorney requested she be placed in a pretrial diversion program for mental health treatment, citing a diagnosis of histrionic personality disorder. The judge denied the request, determining that Louise posed a risk to the public. In February 2019, both David and Louise changed their pleas to guilty. They each pleaded guilty to 1 count of torture, 3 counts of willful child abuse, 4 counts of false imprisonment, and 6 counts of cruelty to an adult dependent. In exchange for their guilty pleas, prosecutors agreed not to seek a lengthier sentence. On April 19, 2019, the Turpin parents were sentenced. 2 of the adult children appeared in court to give victim impact statements. One daughter, shaking and clutching tissues, spoke directly to her parents. "My parents took my whole life from me," she said, "but now I'm taking my life back." She described how she was now in college, living independently, and had learned to love life. "I'm a fighter," she said. "I'm strong, and I'm shooting through life like a rocket." She said she believed everything happened for a reason, that the bad times had made her strong. "I saw my dad change my mom," she said. "They almost changed me." A son also testified. "I cannot describe in words what we went through growing up," he said. "Sometimes I still have nightmares of things that had happened, such as my siblings being chained up or getting beaten. But that is the past, and this is now." He spoke about learning to ride a bike, about going to college, about becoming independent. He said he loved his parents and had forgiven them for much of what they had done. Other children submitted statements that were read in court. Not all of them condemned their parents. Some expressed continued love and even asked for lighter sentences. One daughter said she wanted the restraining order lifted so she could visit her parents. "I want the court to know that our parents loved each other and loved each of their children," her statement said. She believed her parents had tried their best to raise all 13 children and wanted to give them a good life. Another statement said, "I believe our parents feared if they asked for help, they would lose their children." Louise Turpin wept as she spoke to the court. "I'm sorry for everything I've done to hurt my children," she said. "I love my children so much. I look forward to the day I can see them, hug them, and tell them I'm sorry." David Turpin also attempted to address the court, but broke down. His lawyer finished reading his statement. "I am so proud of each and every one of my children," it said. "My homeschooling and discipline had good intentions. I'm sorry if I've done anything to cause them harm." Judge Bernard Schwartz addressed the defendants directly. "Children are indeed a gift," he said, "not only to their parents and families, but also to society." He spoke of how children might grow up to become scientists, doctors, first responders, or members of the military. "The selfish, cruel, and inhuman treatment of your own children has deprived them, your family, your friends, and society of those gifts," Schwartz said. "Their lives have been permanently altered in their ability to learn, grow, and thrive. To the extent that they do thrive, it will be not because of you both, but in spite of you both." David and Louise Turpin were each sentenced to 25 years to life in prison with the possibility of parole. They are eligible for parole after serving 25 years. They will be in their 80s if released. The aftermath of the Turpin case revealed additional failures. A report found that the social service system had catastrophically failed the children. 5 states had been involved with the family over the years, and at every turn, opportunities to intervene were missed. Homeschooling regulations were not enforced. Neighbors' concerns were not investigated. The family moved across state lines, and information did not follow them. Then, in a heartbreaking twist, some of the Turpin children who were placed in foster care were abused again. 6 of the children were placed with a family named Olguin. In 2021, authorities began investigating allegations that the foster parents had also abused the Turpin children in their care. In 2024, Marcelino Olguin was sentenced to 7 years in prison for lewd acts on a child, false imprisonment, and child endangerment. His wife Rosa and adult daughter Lenny's received probation. The children who had survived their parents' house of horrors had been placed in another abusive situation. The system had failed them twice. The Turpin children have shown remarkable resilience. Some have pursued education. Some have found independence. They are learning to navigate a world they were never prepared for, acquiring basic skills that most people develop in childhood. They are building lives from almost nothing, carrying trauma that will never fully heal, but refusing to be defined solely by what was done to them. The youngest child, who was only 2 when her parents were arrested, appears to have been spared most of the abuse. She has a chance at a relatively normal life. The others will spend years, perhaps lifetimes, recovering from what David and Louise Turpin did to them. The physical damage can be treated, the psychological damage runs deeper, yet the fact that they survived, that they escaped, that some are now thriving despite everything, is a testament to the strength of the human spirit. The house in Paris where the Turpin children were held captive still stands. It looks ordinary from the outside. That was always the most disturbing aspect of the case. Behind a normal-looking door in a normal-looking neighborhood, 13 children were being tortured by the 2 people who should have protected them above all others, their parents. The people who brought them into the world chose to systematically destroy them, and they did it together, partners in cruelty, for decades. The Turpin case forced a national conversation about homeschooling oversight, about child protective services, about how easily abuse can be hidden when families are isolated. It exposed the gap between public image and private reality. David and Louise posted cheerful photos and renewed their vows in Vegas, while their children were chained to beds and starving at home. The question remains, how many other families are hiding similar horrors behind closed doors? How many children are suffering in silence, waiting for someone to notice, waiting for a chance to escape? Case 5, Jennifer and Sarah Hart. On March 26, 2018, a German tourist hiking along California's scenic Highway 1 in Mendocino County noticed something unusual on the rocks below a steep cliff. A vehicle had crashed, landing upside down about 100 feet beneath the roadway. He alerted authorities. When rescue workers rappelled down to the wreckage, they found a GMC Yukon and 8 bodies. Jennifer and Sarah Hart, both 38 years old, were dead inside the SUV. Nearby, 3 of their 6 adopted children were also found. Marcus, 19, Jeremiah, 14, Abigail, 14, all dead. The Hart family had been living in Woodland, Washington. Jennifer and Sarah were a married couple who had adopted 6 black children from the foster care system in Texas. To the outside world, they presented an image of a progressive, loving, multiracial family. They attended music festivals together, often wearing matching outfits. They posted photos on social media showing happy, smiling children holding signs with messages about love and equality. One photo in particular had gone viral in 2014. It showed Devonte Hart, then 12 years old, crying while hugging a white police officer at a protest in Portland, Oregon. The image became a symbol of healing and hope during a time of racial tension. Devonte's tear-streaked face and the officer's embrace were shared millions of times. But behind that carefully constructed image was a very different reality. The Hart children were being abused, starved, and systematically isolated from anyone who might help them. The first warning signs appeared in 2008, when the family was living in Minnesota. A teacher observed bruises on Hannah's left arm. Hannah said she had been hit by Jennifer with a belt. Within months, all 6 children had been pulled out of the public school system for a year. In 2010, Abigail told authorities she had "always" on her back and stomach. She said she felt threatened by Jennifer and Sarah, who had beaten her and held her head in cold water over a penny they believed she had stolen. When the investigation expanded, all the children reported being spanked constantly and deprived of food. Sarah took responsibility for the abuse. She pleaded guilty to misdemeanor domestic assault and was sentenced to community service for a year. 1 year later, in 2011, Hannah reportedly told a school nurse that she had not eaten all day. Sarah dismissed this, claiming Hannah was merely playing the food card and recommending the school just give her water. Shortly after, Jennifer and Sarah pulled all 6 children out of school permanently. They would be homeschooled from that point forward. The children were now completely isolated. The family moved to West Linn, Oregon in 2013. There, a friend reported concerns that the children seemed malnourished. An investigation was opened by the Oregon Department of Human Services. The children were examined by a doctor who noted that all 6 fell below their growth charts. But the investigation did not result in the children being removed from the home. The Harts were given the benefit of the doubt. They were white, educated, articulate women who appeared devoted to their children. The concerns were noted, but the family remained intact. In 2017, the Harts moved again, this time to Woodland, Washington. They bought a house and settled into what neighbors assumed was a quiet life. But their new neighbors, Bruce and Dana DeKalb, began noticing troubling signs. In March 2017, Hannah appeared at their door just after 1:30 in the morning. She was missing several front teeth. She told the DeKalbs that her parents were racist and abusive, and she begged them to protect her and call the police. The DeKalbs brought her back to the Hart home. When they asked to speak to Hannah alone, Jennifer replied, "We do everything as a family." Hannah then handed them a handwritten note apologizing for her actions and saying she had lied to get attention. Dana DeKalb told her father about the bizarre encounter. He reported Jennifer and Sarah Hart to authorities. No follow-up action was taken. Several months later, in March 2018, Devonte Hart approached Bruce DeKalb while he was working on his truck. The 15-year-old boy nervously asked if he could have something to eat. He specifically asked DeKalb not to tell his parents. DeKalb gave him food. This happened several more times over the following days. Devonte would appear, ask for food, and beg the DeKalbs not to tell his mothers. The neighbors realized something was seriously wrong. They contacted Child Protective Services in Washington. On March 23, 2018, a CPS caseworker came to the Hart home for a welfare check. No one answered the door. The caseworker returned twice more over the next 2 days. Each time, no one answered, though the family's vehicle was in the driveway. What the caseworker did not know was that Jennifer and Sarah had seen her coming. They had made a decision. Rather than face investigation, they were going to run. The family loaded into their SUV and fled. They drove south toward California. During the drive, Sarah Hart used her phone to conduct a series of disturbing Google searches. She searched for information about suicide. She searched for questions like, can 500 ml of Benadryl kill a 120-pound woman? She asked whether death by drowning would be painful. She researched no-kill animal shelters. Investigators would later recover these deleted searches from her phone. The searches happened while the vehicle was in motion, somewhere between Washington and California. On March 25th, surveillance footage captured Jennifer Hart at a Safeway in Fort Bragg, California. She purchased personal care items including toothbrushes, deodorant, socks, and other supplies. Later that same day, she was seen at a Dollar Tree. The family drove to Mendocino County and found a location along Highway 1. At approximately 3 a.m. on March 26th, Jennifer Hart stopped the SUV at a flat pullout area near the cliff edge. What happened next was confirmed by expert analysis of the vehicle's internal computer system. Jennifer Hart placed the throttle at 100%. She accelerated from a standing stop, reaching 20 miles per hour in 3 seconds. The SUV went over the edge and plummeted 100 feet to the rocks below. There were no skid marks. Jennifer did not apply the brakes. She pressed the gas pedal to the floor and drove her entire family off the cliff. Toxicology results later revealed that Jennifer had a blood alcohol level over the legal limit. She rarely drank, which meant she had likely consumed alcohol to build up her courage for what she was about to do. Sarah had taken 42 doses of Benadryl, enough to be extremely intoxicated or unconscious. The children also had high amounts of the sleep-inducing drug in their systems. Marcus would have taken approximately 19 doses. Abigail would have taken 14. Jeremiah would have taken nearly 9. California Highway Patrol investigator Jake Slates concluded that the children were more than likely asleep or unconscious when the vehicle went over the cliff. The bodies of Marcus, Jeremiah, and Abigail were found at the scene on March 26. Weeks later, the body of 12-year-old Sierra was pulled from the Pacific Ocean. In May, parts of a foot in a shoe washed up on a beach. DNA testing eventually identified the remains as belonging to 16-year-old Hannah. 15-year-old Devontae Hart, the boy whose viral photo had symbolized hope and healing, was never found. Authorities believe he perished with his family, but his body has never been recovered. In April 2019, a special coroner's jury heard 2 days of testimony and deliberated for about an hour. The verdict was unanimous. Jennifer and Sarah Hart died by suicide. The 6 children died at the hands of another. It was murder-suicide. The evidence presented at the inquest was damning. Investigator Slates testified that at some point during their drive to California, Jennifer and Sarah made a conscious decision. If they can't have their kids, he said, then nobody was going to have their kids. Officer Timothy Roloff analyzed the vehicle's black box data. He confirmed that Jennifer accelerated to full throttle before going over the cliff. There are times, maybe if you're merging on the freeway, that you hit 100% throttle, he said. But if you're at a cliff edge and you're with your family, how often do you apply 100% throttle? The Hart case exposed catastrophic failures in the child welfare system across multiple states. The family had moved from Minnesota to Oregon to Washington, and at each location concerns were raised. Teachers reported bruises. Friends reported malnourishment. Neighbors reported children begging for food. Sarah pleaded guilty to assault. Yet the children were never removed from the home. Investigations were opened and then closed. Reports were filed and then forgotten. Jennifer and Sarah Hart were given chance after chance. Experts later pointed to a disturbing pattern. The Harts were white adoptive parents who had taken in black children from the foster care system. They presented themselves as progressive, loving, and committed to social justice. They attended protests and posted about equality. Child welfare workers, educators, and investigators appeared reluctant to believe that such parents could be abusers. The Harts received the benefit of the doubt again and again. Meanwhile, research has shown that black families are far more likely to have their children removed for minor issues. Black parents face harsher scrutiny and swifter consequences for infractions that white parents are often forgiven. The birth families of the Hart children had lost them to the foster care system, in some cases for issues related to poverty or neglect that could have been addressed with support. Those children were then adopted by Jennifer and Sarah Hart, who subjected them to years of systematic abuse and starvation before ultimately killing them. The system that was supposed to protect these children failed them at every turn. Friends of the Hart family said they had no idea anything was wrong. There were no clues anywhere that something was wrong, one friend told reporters. The family attended music festivals and seemed happy. The children were quiet and well-behaved. But that silence, that obedience, was the product of fear and control. The children knew better than to speak up because when they did, they were punished. When Hannah showed up at the neighbor's door at 1:30 in the morning, she was taking an enormous risk. When Devontae asked for food, he was begging for help in the only way he could. According to an incident report, Sarah once told a coworker that she wished someone had told her it was okay not to have a big family. She said that if someone had, then she and Jennifer would not have adopted the children. The statement reveals a chilling truth. The children were not seen as individuals with inherent worth. They were seen as burdens, as accessories to the image Jennifer and Sarah wanted to project, as problems to be managed or disposed of. The Hart case inspired an episode of the FX television series Atlanta. The episode, titled 3 Slaps, depicted a black child in an abusive relationship with white adoptive parents. The show used the Hart tragedy to explore themes of performative progressivism, the commodification of black children by white saviors, and the way systems fail vulnerable kids. The episode does not end with a murder-suicide, but the parallels are clear and intentional. The memory of the Hart children deserves more than the viral photo of Devontae hugging a police officer. Marcus, Hannah, Devontae, Jeremiah, Abigail, and Sierra were real children with individual personalities, hopes, and potential. They were failed by their birth families, failed by the foster care system, failed by their adoptive parents, and failed by every authority figure who had the power to intervene and chose not to. They begged for help. They showed up at neighbors' doors. They asked for food, and no one saved them. Jennifer and Sarah Hart drove off that cliff because they would rather kill their children than lose control of them. They would rather commit murder-suicide than face accountability for the abuse they had inflicted for years. They chose death over investigation, over the possibility that their carefully constructed image would be shattered, and 6 children paid the price. The case remains a stark reminder that progressive politics do not prevent abuse. Good intentions do not equal good parenting. And the failure to see adoptive parents, particularly white adoptive parents, as capable of cruelty allows abuse to continue unchecked. The Hart children deserved better. They deserved to be believed when they asked for help. They deserved a system that valued their safety over the comfort of their abusers. They deserved to live. Case 6. Anthony Todd Celebration, Florida is a master-planned community located just south of Walt Disney World. It was designed to evoke an idealized vision of small-town America with pristine streets, charming architecture, and a sense of safety and community. Residents chose to live there precisely because it felt like the kind of place where nothing bad could happen. In late December 2019, something unspeakably bad happened inside one of those picture-perfect homes. Anthony Todd was a 46-year-old physical therapist from Connecticut. He had moved his family to Celebration so they could be near Disney World, a place his wife Megan loved. Megan Todd, 42, was a yoga instructor and devoted mother. Their 3 children were Alec, 13, Tyler, 11, and Zoe, 4. They also had a family dog named Breezy. To neighbors and friends, the Tots seemed like a typical family living the Florida dream. But Anthony Todd had been living a lie. His physical therapy clinic in Connecticut had been raided by federal agents in April 2019, pursuant to a healthcare fraud investigation. Anthony had been charging patients for care they never received, using the excess money to pay for the family's home in Celebration and trips to Disney World. He had taken out additional loans from firms in New York City, and when he failed to pay them back, those firms sued him. Anthony was more than $100,000 in debt. Megan and the children had no idea. Anthony kept the financial collapse hidden from them. On December 29, 2019, Megan's sister tried to reach the family. No one answered. She tried again over the following days. Still nothing. By early January, Megan's family was increasingly concerned. They contacted authorities. On January 13, 2020, federal agents arrived at the Todd home to serve an arrest warrant related to the healthcare fraud charges. When Anthony answered the door, he was acting strangely. He seemed disoriented. Agents obtained a key from the property's landlord and entered the home. Inside, they discovered a pungent odor. In beds throughout the house, investigators found the bodies of Megan, Alec, Tyler, and Zoe. They had been dead for weeks. Each victim was wrapped in blankets. Each had a crucifix placed in their hands. All had been stabbed, and all had toxic levels of Benadryl in their systems. In the master bedroom, the family dog Breezy was found dead in her dog bed on the floor. Zoe's body had decomposed to the point that investigators initially could not find her. When they examined Megan's body more closely, they discovered Zoe's remains beneath her mother's feet. Anthony Tott had been living in the house with the decomposing bodies of his wife, his 3 children, and his dog for approximately 2 to 3 weeks. He had consumed a large amount of Benadryl himself in what he later claimed was a suicide attempt, but he survived. When questioned by investigators, Anthony's story changed multiple times. Initially, Anthony told authorities that Megan had killed the children and then herself after learning about the family's dire financial situation. He claimed he came home to find them dead and, overcome with grief, decided to kill himself as well, but failed. Later, he changed his account. He said Megan had tried to kill herself by stabbing herself in the liver after killing the children, and he had finished what she started. In another version, he admitted to killing Megan and the youngest child, but claimed the 2 older boys drowned. Eventually, a different story emerged from Anthony's own statements and the physical evidence. Anthony had given his family Benadryl, drugging them. He then stabbed Megan, Alec, Tyler, and Zoe. The method of death was determined to be a combination of the stab wounds and suffocation or strangulation. The medical examiner could not determine the exact sequence, but it was clear that Anthony had killed his entire family. He also killed the family dog. After the murders, he wrapped each body in blankets, placed crucifixes in their hands, and remained in the house with them for weeks. During this time, Anthony told investigators he believed he was saving his family from the apocalypse. He claimed he was trying to ensure they could all pass over to the other side together. He said everybody needed to die in order to pass over because the apocalypse was coming. This explanation would shift again as the case progressed. At times, Anthony claimed he could not recall the murders. He said his initial confession had been made under duress. He testified that he was unable to remember what happened. What made the case particularly disturbing was not only the murders themselves, but Anthony's behavior afterward. For weeks he lived alone in that house, surrounded by the decomposing bodies of his wife and children. He did not leave. He did not turn himself in. He did not call for help. He simply stayed there, existing in a surreal nightmare of his own creation, until federal agents arrived to arrest him on unrelated fraud charges. The backstory added another layer of horror. In 1980, when Anthony was just 4 years old, his father, Robert Tott, had been arrested and charged with hiring one of his former students to shoot and kill his wife, Loretta. Robert wanted to be with his mistress and saw murder as the solution. The hitman was ordered to harm no one but Loretta. Anthony, at age 4, witnessed the attack on his mother. Loretta survived a bullet to the head and went on to remarry. Robert Tott was convicted. Anthony grew up knowing his father had tried to have his mother killed. Decades later, Anthony would annihilate his own family. The trial began in 2022. Prosecutors argued that Anthony had grown tired of his family and killed them to relieve himself of the burden. They pointed to his mounting debt, the impending fraud charges, and his complete failure to take responsibility. The defense maintained that the state had not proven the case beyond a reasonable doubt. They noted that the medical examiner could not definitively determine whether the children were suffocated, strangled, or died from the stab wounds. They pointed out that some of the stab wounds appeared to have been inflicted after death. They argued that Anthony's various confessions were unreliable and made under psychological duress. The jury did not find the defense arguments persuasive. On April 14, 2022, Anthony Todt was convicted of 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of animal cruelty. The conviction on all counts took the jury less than 3 hours. Anthony showed little reaction as the verdicts were read. At sentencing, the judge made a point of emphasizing the comprehensive nature of Anthony's crimes. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murders. Then, in a landmark move, the judge added 1 year to the sentence specifically for the animal cruelty charge related to killing Breezy, the family dog. The additional year was symbolic but significant. It reflected the court's recognition that Anthony had destroyed every living being in his care. He had not even spared the dog. During the sentencing, Anthony turned to the family of Kiara Hawkins in the courtroom. Kiara had been the girlfriend of one of the victims in a separate case, and it appears there was some confusion in the proceedings, but Anthony's statement was telling. "I know you don't know me that well, but I promise you I didn't hurt your daughter," he said. Even at sentencing, Anthony was focused on his own image, his own narrative, his own desire to be seen as something other than what he was. Megan's family has spoken about the devastating loss. Megan was a loving mother who devoted herself to her children. Alec was a bright 13-year-old with his whole life ahead of him. Tyler was 11, full of energy and potential. Zoe was only 4, a little girl who should have had decades of life to experience. They were all taken by the one person who was supposed to protect them above all others. The Todt case raises difficult questions about financial desperation and family annihilation. Anthony faced serious fraud charges and overwhelming debt. His carefully constructed life was collapsing. Rather than face the consequences, rather than admit his failures to his family and work toward a solution, he chose to murder them. He later tried to frame the killings as an act of mercy, as saving them from the apocalypse, as something other than what it was. But the evidence told a clearer story. Anthony drugged his family, stabbed them, and then lived with their bodies for weeks in a home in one of the most idealized communities in America. The intergenerational violence is impossible to ignore. Anthony witnessed his father's attempt to have his mother murdered when he was 4 years old. That trauma shaped his childhood. Yet, instead of breaking the cycle, Anthony enacted an even worse version of it. His father had hired someone else to commit murder, and his mother survived. Anthony committed the murders himself, and no one in his immediate family survived. The violence passed from one generation to the next, amplified and completed. Celebration, Florida, the community designed to evoke safety and wholesomeness, became the site of a family massacre. Neighbors were horrified to learn what had been happening just doors away. The home where the Todts lived and died has since been occupied by other residents, but the story remains. In a place built to be perfect, to be immune to the darkness of the outside world, a man killed his entire family and lived among their corpses for weeks, claiming he was preparing them for the apocalypse. Anthony Todt is currently serving his life sentence in a Florida prison. He will never be released. Megan, Alec, Tyler, and Zoe Todt are gone. Their lives were stolen by someone who claimed to love them, who claimed to be protecting them, who claimed his actions were somehow justified. The truth is simpler and more terrible. Anthony Todt was a man who faced consequences for his own actions and decided his family should die rather than witness his failure. He chose murder over accountability. And in doing so, he destroyed not just 5 lives, but the future those lives represented, the memories that would never be made, the moments that would never happen. All that remains is the horror of what he did, and the question of how anyone could live among the bodies of their own children and call it salvation. Case 7. Alex Murdaugh. For nearly a century, the Murdaugh name meant power in South Carolina's Low Country. 3 generations of Murdaugh men served as the elected solicitor for the 14th Judicial Circuit, controlling prosecutions across 5 counties for 87 consecutive years. The family's law firm dominated civil litigation in the region. When a Murdaugh spoke, judges listened, law enforcement deferred, and opposing attorneys knew they were facing not just a lawyer, but an institution. Alex Murdaugh, the 4th generation, grew up believing he was untouchable. On June 7, 2021, that belief led him to commit murder. That evening, Alex called 911 from the family's hunting property near Islandton, South Carolina. His voice was frantic, barely coherent. He told the dispatcher he had found his wife and son shot to death. When officers arrived, they found 52-year-old Maggie Murdaugh near the dog kennels, shot multiple times with a rifle. Her 22-year-old son Paul was nearby, killed by 2 shotgun blasts, one of which had catastrophically damaged his head. The scene was horrific. Alex appeared devastated, pacing and crying, calling family members to tell them the terrible news. Investigators initially treated Alex as a grieving husband and father. The Murdaugh family's stature in the community seemed to place them above suspicion. But as the investigation progressed, a different picture began to emerge. Alex Murdaugh was not a victim. He was a perpetrator who had been living a double life for years, and that life was rapidly unraveling. The Murdaugh family's troubles had begun years earlier, though few people outside the family knew it. In February 2018, the family's housekeeper, Gloria Satterfield, died after what was described as a trip-and-fall accident at the Murdaugh home. Alex encouraged Gloria's family to sue him for wrongful death, promising he would not contest the claim so they could recover insurance money. He recommended a lawyer to represent them. What Gloria's family did not know was that Alex and the lawyer he recommended settled the case for over $4 million and never told the family. Alex pocketed the money. Gloria's sons received nothing. Then, in February 2019, Paul Murdaugh was involved in a boat crash that killed 19-year-old Mallory Beach. Paul had been driving his father's boat while heavily intoxicated. The crash threw Mallory into the dark water, and her body was not recovered for a week. Paul was charged with 3 counts of boating under the influence, resulting in death. The case drew intense scrutiny. Some observers noted that the initial investigation seemed compromised, with potential evidence handled improperly and Paul receiving favorable treatment. The Murdaugh name appeared to be working its magic once again, but the Beach family refused to be silenced. They filed a civil suit against Alex, Paul, and others, demanding accountability. The suit threatened to expose the family's finances through the discovery process. That was a problem because Alex Murdaugh had been stealing money for years. Alex was a partner at his family's prestigious law firm, PMPED, Peters, Murdaugh, Parker, Elsroth, and Dietrich. He handled personal injury cases, often securing large settlements for clients. What those clients did not know was that Alex was diverting portions of their settlements into accounts he controlled. He forged signatures, created fake documentation, and siphoned millions of dollars. He used the stolen money to fund a lavish lifestyle and to support an opioid addiction that cost him tens of thousands of dollars a week. By 2021, Alex had embezzled close to $9 million from clients and the law firm. The walls were closing in. Paul's upcoming trial for the boat crash meant depositions, financial disclosures, and scrutiny. The law firm was beginning to ask questions about missing money. Alex's drug addiction was spiraling. His carefully constructed image was cracking. On June 7, 2021, Alex decided to eliminate 2 problems at once. He would kill Paul and Maggie, blame an unknown assailant seeking revenge over the boat crash, and use the sympathy and chaos to delay or derail the financial investigations. At approximately 8:49 p.m., Alex shot his wife and son at the dog kennels on the family property. He used two different weapons, likely to create confusion and suggest multiple shooters. Maggie was shot 4 or 5 times with a rifle. Paul was shot twice with a shotgun at close range. After the murders, Alex manufactured an alibi. He drove to his mother's house, spent a brief time there establishing his presence, and then returned to the hunting property. At 10:07 p.m., he called 911. The initial investigation focused on other suspects. Investigators considered whether someone connected to the boat crash might have sought revenge. They looked into whether Paul had enemies. The Murdaugh family's prominence and Alex's apparent grief seemed to place him beyond suspicion, at least initially. But inconsistencies began to emerge. Alex's timeline did not quite add up. His behavior seemed off. And then other secrets started spilling out. 3 months after the murders, on September 4, 2021, Alex called 911 again. This time, he reported he had been shot in the head while changing a tire on the side of the road. He claimed an unknown assailant in a pickup truck had shot him and driven away. Alex was airlifted to a hospital. His wound was superficial. Within days, the story fell apart. Alex had arranged his own shooting, hiring a man named Curtis Smith to kill him so his surviving son Buster could collect a $10 million life insurance payout. The plan failed when Smith's shot only grazed Alex's head. The botched suicide-for-hire scheme accelerated everything. Alex resigned from his law firm. The firm announced it had discovered he had been stealing money. Alex checked into rehab, citing his opioid addiction. He was arrested and charged with insurance fraud and conspiracy. Then the financial crimes began piling up. Charge after charge detailed how Alex had stolen from vulnerable clients, including a quadriplegic man, a family involved in a fatal car crash, and the sons of his dead housekeeper. Throughout this unraveling, investigators continued to focus on the murders of Maggie and Paul. The case against Alex grew stronger. Cell phone data placed him at the kennels minutes before the murders, despite his claims he had not been there. A video recorded on Paul's phone captured Alex's voice at the kennels at 8:44 p.m., just minutes before the shooting. Alex had lied about his whereabouts. Ballistics evidence linked the weapons to guns at the Murdaugh property. The shotgun that killed Paul was a family weapon. The clothing Alex wore that night disappeared and was never found. On July 14, 2022, Alex Murdaugh was indicted for the murders of his wife and son. He was charged with 2 counts of murder and 2 counts of possession of a weapon during a violent crime. The trial began in January 2023 and lasted 6 weeks. It became a media sensation, broadcast live, and watched by millions. Prosecutors laid out their case methodically. Alex had motive. The financial crimes were about to be exposed, and killing Maggie and Paul bought him time and sympathy. He had opportunity. He was at the scene just before the murders. He had means. The weapons belonged to the family. And he had lied repeatedly about his whereabouts and actions. The defense argued that Alex loved his family and would never harm them. They suggested the real killers were still out there, perhaps connected to the boat crash or to Paul's reputation for reckless behavior. They pointed to Alex's grief and the lack of direct eyewitness testimony, placing a weapon in his hands. But the evidence was overwhelming. The lies, the financial desperation, the cell phone data, the video placing him at the scene, the missing clothes, the staged alibi, all of it pointed to Alex. On March 2, 2023, after less than 3 hours of deliberation, the jury convicted Alex Murdaugh of 2 counts of murder and 2 counts of weapons possession. He showed little reaction as the verdicts were read. The next day, Judge Clifton Newman sentenced him to 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. During sentencing, Judge Newman addressed Alex directly. He spoke of the Murdaugh family's long history in the legal system and noted the profound betrayal Alex had committed. "It might not have been you," Newman said, referring to previous generations, "but the conduct of others that has resulted in what we have today, with the scion of a legal dynasty from here in the Low Country paying the consequences of what happened." The Murdaugh murders exposed a staggering web of corruption and tragedy extending far beyond June 7, 2021. Investigators identified at least 5 other deaths connected to the family that warranted further scrutiny. In addition to Gloria Satterfield's suspicious fall and Mallory Beach's death in the boat crash, there was the 2015 death of Stephen Smith, a 19-year-old found dead on a rural road under circumstances that suggested homicide rather than the hit-and-run initially claimed. Stephen's death had been linked to the Murdaugh family in rumors for years, and his case was reopened following the murders. Then there was the strange death of Alex's longtime friend and fellow attorney Corey Fleming, who had helped Alex steal money from clients, but later cooperated with authorities. And questions arose about other legal cases the Murdaughs had handled over the decades, about whether justice had been corrupted, not just by Alex, but by the entire dynasty. Alex was subsequently tried and convicted on multiple financial fraud charges in state and federal court. He pleaded guilty to stealing nearly $9 million from clients and his law firm. He received additional decades of prison time for those crimes, though the sentences are largely symbolic given his 2 life sentences for murder. The law firm that bore the Murdaugh name removed it. The legal dynasty that had controlled the Low Country for a century collapsed in a matter of months. The case became the subject of multiple documentaries and extensive media coverage. It captivated the nation not just because of the murders, but because of what the murders represented: the end of a corrupt system that had operated for generations, shielded by wealth, power, and a name that had once been synonymous with justice. The Murdaughs had believed they were above the law. For nearly a century, they had been proven right. Alex Murdaugh's downfall proved they were not. Maggie Murdaugh was remembered by friends as a devoted mother and a warm presence in her community. She did not deserve to die on her family's hunting property, shot down by the man she had trusted for decades. Paul Murdaugh, despite his involvement in Mallory Beach's death, was a young man who deserved the chance to face justice, to learn from his mistakes, to grow. Instead, his father killed him, not out of love or protection, but to buy time and sympathy while Alex's criminal empire crumbled. The Beach family, the Satterfield family, the Smith family, all of them were denied justice for years because of the Murdaugh name. Mallory Beach's mother, Renee, fought tirelessly to hold Paul and Alex accountable for her daughter's death. Gloria Satterfield's son spent years not knowing that a multi-million-dollar settlement had been reached in their mother's name and that they had been cheated out of every penny. Stephen Smith's mother never stopped questioning the official narrative of her son's death, even when investigators seemed uninterested in pursuing the truth. Alex Murdaugh is currently serving his life sentences in a South Carolina prison. He continues to maintain his innocence in the murders of Maggie and Paul, despite his conviction. He has admitted to the financial crimes, expressing remorse primarily for the damage to his reputation and his family's name. The surviving son, Buster Murdaugh, has stood by his father publicly, insisting Alex could not have committed the murders. The Murdaugh case serves as a reminder that power and privilege can corrupt justice for decades, but they cannot do so forever. Eventually, the weight of lies becomes too heavy to sustain. Eventually, the bodies pile up and the truth demands to be heard. Alex Murdaugh thought he could murder his way out of accountability, that sympathy for a grieving father would overshadow questions about a corrupt lawyer. He was wrong. The legal dynasty that had ruled the Low Country for nearly a century ended not with honor, but with 2 life sentences for murder and the exposure of years of theft, lies, and betrayal. The Murdaugh name, once synonymous with power and justice, is now synonymous with the opposite. And Alex Murdaugh, who believed himself untouchable, will die in prison. Case 8. Raymond Childs III. On the evening of January 23, 2021, 17-year-old Raymond Childs III broke his curfew. When he returned to his family's home on Adams Street in Indianapolis, his father, Raymond Childs Jr., confronted him. The punishment was grounding. For a teenager in an already troubled household, it was the kind of discipline that happens in families across the country every day. What happened next was not. In the early morning hours of January 24th, Raymond Childs III picked up a gun and moved through the house systematically. He shot his father, 42-year-old Raymond Childs Jr., multiple times. He shot his stepmother, 44-year-old Kezzie Childs. He shot his 18-year-old brother, Elijah. He shot Elijah's 19-year-old girlfriend, Kiara Hawkins, who was pregnant with Elijah's child. He shot his 13-year-old sister, Rita. 6 people died that night, including Kiara's unborn child, whom the family had already named Chaos. One brother survived by hiding and later provided crucial testimony that would help convict Raymond. After the murders, Raymond left the house. Hours later, he returned with his girlfriend, acting as if he had just learned of the tragedy. He pretended to be shocked, to be grieving, to be another victim of whatever violence had torn through his family's home. But investigators quickly determined that Raymond was not a victim. He was the killer. Police arrested him at a relative's home in Plainfield, Indiana, based on the surviving brother's account of what had happened inside the Adams Street house. The case raised immediate and painful questions. How does a 17-year-old go from being grounded for breaking curfew to murdering 6 family members within hours? What transforms teenage anger into mass murder? The answers, as they emerged, revealed a household marked by violence, trauma, and systemic failures. Raymond Childs III had grown up in an environment of domestic violence. His father, Raymond Childs Jr., had a history of battering Raymond's mother and other family members. The children witnessed this violence regularly. Raymond suffered from PTSD as a result of what he had seen and experienced. A child developmental psychologist who evaluated Raymond testified that while he was a victim of beatings and had witnessed terrible violence, Raymond had also professed love for his father and siblings. All the children, the psychologist noted, could not wait to turn 18 so they could leave the abusive home environment. The State Division of Child Protective Services had been made aware of the situation. Reports were filed. Concerns were raised. But intervention never came. The system that was supposed to protect Raymond and his siblings failed. The violence continued, the trauma accumulated. And on January 24, 2021, that trauma manifested in the worst possible way. During his trial, prosecutors argued that Raymond's actions were calculated and merciless. He moved through the house room by room, shooting family members at close range. There was no evidence of an immediate physical threat to Raymond. His father had grounded him, yes, but that was the extent of the conflict. Raymond was not defending himself from imminent harm. He was not acting in the heat of passion during an ongoing assault. He made a decision, picked up a weapon, and systematically killed 6 people, including his pregnant sister-in-law and his 13-year-old sister. The defense did not deny that Raymond committed the murders. Instead, they focused on the context. Raymond's mother testified that Raymond Childs Jr. had battered her in front of her children and that she had fought back. She said the violence was a constant presence in the home. She also made the striking claim that her current boyfriend, who at times had confronted Raymond Jr. over his treatment of the children, was himself under arrest for murder in Lake County. The family was trapped in a cycle of violence that seemed to have no exit. Raymond's defense team argued that the years of abuse, the PTSD, and the toxic environment had damaged him in ways that should be considered when evaluating his culpability. They were not excusing the murders, but they were asking the jury to understand how a child raised in violence might respond to conflict with violence. The prosecution countered that many children grow up in abusive homes and do not become mass murderers. Raymond had choices. He made the worst possible choice. Raymond's first trial ended in a mistrial. The jury could not reach a unanimous verdict. Prosecutors retried the case in October 2024. This time, the jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all 6 counts of murder. Raymond Childs III was convicted of killing his father, stepmother, brother, sister, brother's girlfriend, and her unborn child. At sentencing, Marion County Prosecutor Ryan Mears addressed the court. The defendant brutally murdered 6 people: his father, stepmother, older brother, younger sister, his older brother's girlfriend, and her unborn child, Mears said. There is no penalty that could ever reflect the harm and unimaginable loss caused by the defendant's actions. The judge sentenced Raymond Childs III to 360 years in prison, 60 years for each of the 6 murders. During his sentencing, Raymond turned to face the family of Kiara Hawkins in the courtroom. To Miss Hawkins, he said, "I know you don't know me that well, but I promise you, I didn't hurt your daughter." Even at sentencing, Raymond was denying responsibility for at least some of the murders. The statement was jarring. The jury had convicted him. The evidence had overwhelmed any reasonable doubt, yet Raymond could not or would not accept what he had done. The case highlighted the tragic irony of cyclical violence. Raymond Childs III was a victim long before he became a perpetrator. He watched his father abuse his mother. He suffered beatings himself. He developed PTSD. He lived in fear and trauma. Child Protective Services knew about the situation and did nothing effective to intervene. Raymond was trapped in an environment that damaged him psychologically and emotionally. And when he finally acted out, he did not escape the violence. He became its most extreme expression. But acknowledging Raymond as a victim of abuse does not erase the fact that he murdered 6 people. His 13-year-old sister, Rita, had also grown up in that violent home. She had also witnessed the abuse. She had also suffered. Yet she did not pick up a gun and kill her family. Elijah, Raymond's older brother, had endured the same household. He was building a life with his girlfriend Kiara, preparing to become a father. Raymond killed him too. The abuse Raymond suffered was real and significant, but it does not transform his decision to commit mass murder into something excusable or inevitable. Kiara Hawkins' family has had to live with the knowledge that their daughter and her unborn child were killed by her boyfriend's teenage brother over a curfew dispute. Kiara was 19 years old. She was pregnant. She was planning a future with Elijah. She was in the wrong place at the wrong time, a victim of violence that had nothing to do with her and everything to do with a family's inability to break free from a cycle of abuse. Kezzie Childs, the stepmother, and Rita Childs, the 13-year-old sister, were also caught in that cycle. They lived in the same house, endured the same environment, and were killed by the same hand. Raymond Childs Jr., the father, had been the source of much of the violence in the home. His abuse created the toxic environment that damaged his children, yet he did not deserve to be murdered by his son. No punishment he inflicted on Raymond justified what Raymond did in response. The surviving brother, whose name has been kept out of most public reporting, witnessed the murders or their immediate aftermath. He hid while his family was being killed. He later testified against Raymond, providing critical details about what happened that night. He has to live with the knowledge that his brother killed almost everyone they both loved, and that he survived only by chance or by hiding. The trauma of that survival will stay with him forever. The case also raised difficult questions about Child Protective Services and systemic intervention. Reports were made about the violence in the child's household. Authorities were aware that children were at risk, yet nothing effective was done. The children remained in the home. The abuse continued, and eventually one of those children became a killer. How many reports does it take before intervention happens? How much evidence of harm is required before children are removed from dangerous situations? In the child's case, the answer appears to be more than was available or more than the system was willing to act upon. Raymond's mother made a statement after the sentencing, expressing her belief that her son had not committed all the murders, despite his conviction. She maintained that the system had failed her family long before the murders occurred. She was not wrong about the failure, even if her belief in her son's innocence contradicted the jury's findings. The system did fail. Child Protective Services failed to protect Raymond and his siblings from abuse. Mental health resources failed to address Raymond's PTSD. The community failed to break the cycle of violence that had claimed multiple generations. Raymond Childs III is now serving 360 years in an Indiana prison. He will never be released. He will spend the rest of his life incarcerated for murders he committed when he was 17 years old. Some will see this as justice. Others will see it as the final failure in a long chain of failures, the moment when society gave up on a damaged child and decided that punishment was the only response left. The Adams Street house, where 6 people died in the early hours of January 24, 2021, stands as a reminder that violence begets violence, that trauma unaddressed becomes trauma inflicted, and that the failure to protect children has consequences that extend far beyond the children themselves. Raymond Childs Jr. abused his family. Child Protective Services failed to intervene. Raymond Childs III, traumatized and damaged, responded to being grounded by murdering 6 people. The cycle of violence claimed them all. The question is not whether Raymond Childs III deserved to be punished for what he did. The jury answered that question. The judge answered that question. 360 years in prison is the answer. The question is whether we as a society can do better at breaking cycles of violence before they escalate to mass murder. Can we intervene earlier, more effectively, more decisively? Can we protect children from abusive homes before those children become either corpses or killers? The Childs family case suggests we have not yet figured out how. And until we do, the cycle will continue, claiming new victims and creating new perpetrators, each one a failure we might have prevented. Case 9, Chris Watts. Shanann Watts loved her family. She posted about them constantly on social media. Photos of her daughters, Bella and Celeste, at birthday parties and playdates. Videos of family trips. Updates about her pregnancy with their 3rd child, a boy they plan to name Nico. Her husband, Chris, appeared in many of the posts, smiling next to his daughters, his arm around Shanann. To anyone following her social media, the Watts family seemed happy, normal, and devoted to each other. Behind that carefully curated image, Chris Watts was planning to kill them all. On the morning of August 13, 2018, in the early hours before sunrise, Chris strangled his wife Shanann in their home in Frederick, Colorado. She was 15 weeks pregnant. After killing her, he loaded her body into his work truck. Then he went to the bedrooms where his daughters slept. 4-year-old Bella and 3-year-old Celeste were still alive. Chris smothered them both. He would later admit that he had tried to kill them earlier while they were sleeping in their beds, but had been unsuccessful. The second attempt was fatal. Chris placed his daughters' bodies in the back seat of his truck, along with Shanann's body. He did not use car seats for the girls. He drove to a remote oil work site operated by Anadarko Petroleum, where he was employed as an operator. There, he buried Shanann in a shallow grave near oil storage tanks. Then he took Bella and Celeste and pushed their small bodies through 8-inch hatches at the top of the oil tanks, dropping them into the crude oil below. He returned home, showered, and prepared to report his family missing. That same day, Shanann's friend arrived at the Watts home for a planned appointment. When Shanann did not answer, the friend became concerned. She knew Shanann had returned late the previous night from a business trip and had a doctor's appointment that morning. She contacted Chris, who claimed he did not know where Shanann and the girls were. The friend called police. Officers arrived and began investigating Shanann's disappearance. Chris gave interviews to the media, pleading for his family's safe return. He stood on the front porch of their home, speaking to reporters about how much he missed his wife and daughters. "I just want them back," he said. "I just want them to come home." He participated in a televised interview where he described Shanann as his rock and said he had no idea what could have happened. His performance was wooden and unconvincing. His effect was flat. Observers noticed he showed little emotion for a man whose pregnant wife and 2 young daughters had vanished. Behind the scenes, investigators were already suspicious. A neighbor had security camera footage showing Chris loading items into his truck early that morning, backing the vehicle into the garage in an unusual way. Shanann's phone and other belongings were still at the house. Her purse, her medication, the girls' favorite toys, and blankets, all left behind. Nothing suggested the family had left voluntarily. And Chris's story kept changing in small ways that suggested deception. Chris agreed to take a polygraph test. He failed. Confronted with the results, he changed his story. He now claimed that he had killed Shanann, but only after he witnessed her strangling their daughters. He said he had told Shanann he wanted a separation, and in response, she had murdered Bella and Celeste. Overcome with rage, he said, he strangled Shanann. This version of events was a lie, and investigators knew it. The evidence told a different story. On August 15, 2018, Chris Watts was arrested and charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts of murdering a child, 1 count of unlawful termination of a pregnancy, and 3 counts of tampering with a deceased human body. He led investigators to the oil site where he had hidden the bodies. The recovery was difficult and disturbing. Shanann's body was exhumed from the shallow grave. Bella and Celeste's small bodies had to be extracted from the oil tanks, a process that took hours and traumatized the workers involved. The autopsies revealed the full horror. Shanann had been strangled. Bella and Celeste had been smothered. Bella had fought. She had bitten her tongue, a sign that she struggled before she died. She may have been alive when her father pushed her through the hatch into the oil tank. The medical examiner could not rule out that possibility. Celeste had oil in her stomach, suggesting she too may have still been alive when she entered the tank. The image of those little girls, alone and terrified in the darkness, falling into crude oil, became one of the most haunting aspects of the case. As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered Chris's motive. He had been having an affair with a co-worker named Nickel Kessinger. The relationship had begun in June 2018, just weeks before the murders. Chris told Nickel that his marriage was ending, that he and Shanann were separated, that he was about to be free. He seemed infatuated with Nickel, searching online for wedding venues and romantic getaways. He wanted a new life, a fresh start, and he saw his family as an obstacle to that future. Chris had also been secretly trying to end Shanann's pregnancy. He gave her OxyContin, hoping it would cause a miscarriage. When that did not work, he decided to eliminate the problem more directly. Financial stress played a role as well. The family was in debt, behind on their mortgage, and facing potential foreclosure. Chris saw his obligations to his wife, his daughters, his unborn son, as burdens he could simply erase. Shanann's family was devastated. Her parents, Sandy and Frank Ruchek, had adored their grandchildren. They had been supportive of the marriage, even when they noticed signs that things might not be as perfect as Shanann's social media suggested. They had never imagined Chris was capable of something like this. Shanann's brother spoke about the family's loss, about how Bella and Celeste would never grow up, never go to school, never have their own families. Shanann would never meet her son. Her life had been stolen by the man who promised to protect her. Facing overwhelming evidence, Chris pleaded guilty in November 2018. The plea agreement allowed him to avoid the death penalty which Shanann's family had requested. They did not want to endure years of trials and appeals. They wanted the case to be over. Chris was sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, plus 48 years for the unlawful termination of Shanann's pregnancy and 36 years for tampering with the bodies. He would die in prison. After his conviction, Chris gave multiple interviews and confessions, each one revealing more details and changing his story in various ways. He admitted that he had murdered Bella and Celeste himself, that his earlier claim about Shanann killing them was a lie. He described the murders in disturbing detail, explaining how he had smothered the girls one at a time, how Bella had asked, "Is the same thing going to happen to me as Cece?" before he killed her. The confessions served no legal purpose. Chris had already been sentenced, but he seemed compelled to talk, to explain, to justify what he had done in ways that made sense to no one but himself. The case became a cultural phenomenon in 2020 when Netflix released the documentary American Murder: The Family Next Door. The film used Shanann's social media posts, text messages, police body camera footage, and interrogation videos to tell the story. Viewers watched the juxtaposition of Shanann's happy family posts with the reality of what Chris had been planning. The documentary was watched by millions and sparked intense public interest in the case. For many, it became a cautionary tale about the gap between public image and private reality, about the dangers of assuming that a smiling family photo reflects the truth. Chris Watts was initially incarcerated in Colorado, but was later transferred to a prison in Wisconsin for his own safety. Other inmates had threatened him. He receives letters from women who claim to be in love with him, a phenomenon that criminologists have documented in other high-profile murder cases. He has given interviews from prison, offering various explanations for his crimes, none of which adequately answer the question of how a father could murder his own children in cold blood. Shanann, Bella, and Celeste Watts are buried together in North Carolina near Shanann's family. Their graves are marked with photos and mementos. Shanann's parents have worked to keep their memory alive, to ensure that when people think of the Watts case, they remember the victims, not just the crime. They have spoken about their granddaughters' personalities, about how Bella was smart and talkative, how Celeste was sweet and shy. They have talked about Shanann's strength, her dedication to her family, her love for her children. The case also raised questions about the psychology of family annihilators, a term used to describe individuals who kill their entire families, usually to escape financial or personal problems. Chris Watts fit the profile almost perfectly. He was facing financial stress. He wanted to be with another woman. He saw his family as an impediment to the life he wanted. Rather than divorce, rather than face the consequences of his choices, he chose murder. Researchers have noted that family annihilators often believe they are solving problems, that by eliminating their families, they are clearing the path to a better future. The logic is monstrous, but to the perpetrator, it makes a terrible kind of sense. What makes the Watts case particularly disturbing is the premeditation. This was not a crime of passion. Chris did not snap in a moment of rage. He planned the murders. He researched how to dispose of bodies. He chose the oil tanks because he knew they would be difficult to search. He tried multiple times to kill his daughters, failing once, and then trying again. After the murders, he engaged in an elaborate cover-up, giving interviews, pretending to search for his family, lying to investigators. Every step was calculated. The oil tanks have become a central image in the case, a symbol of Chris's cruelty. The thought of those little girls' bodies submerged in crude oil, hidden in darkness, abandoned by their father, is almost unbearable. It speaks to the complete absence of empathy or humanity in Chris's actions. He did not just kill his daughters, he disposed of them like trash, in a manner that denied them even the dignity of a proper burial. Chris Watts will spend the rest of his life in prison, as he should. Shanann, Bella, and Celeste Watts are gone forever. Their story endures not because of the man who killed them, but because of the lives they lived, the love they shared, and the monstrous injustice of their deaths. The case serves as a reminder that danger can come from the people we trust most, that the person sleeping next to us, the parent caring for our children, can be hiding unimaginable darkness. And it reminds us to look beyond the carefully curated images people present to the world, to ask the hard questions, to listen when something feels wrong. Because behind the smiling family photos, behind the perfect social media posts, Chris Watts was planning murder. And by the time anyone realized the truth, it was already too late. Case 10. Ronald Lee Haskell. On July 9, 2014, Ronald Lee Haskell arrived at a suburban home in Spring, Texas, dressed as a delivery driver. He knocked on the door. When 15-year-old Cassidy Stay answered, she did not recognize him at first. Haskell was her aunt's ex-husband, and he had come looking for his former wife, Melanie Lyon. Melanie was Katie Stay's sister, and she had fled to Katie's home seeking safety after a violent divorce. Haskell demanded to know where Melanie was. When Cassidy told him she did not know, he forced his way inside. Inside the house were Cassidy's parents, Stephen Stay, 39, and Katie Stay, 34, along with Cassidy's 4 younger siblings. Zach was 4 years old, Rebecca was 7, Emily was 9, Brian was 13. Haskell held the family at gunpoint, binding their hands behind their backs. He searched the house for Melanie, growing increasingly agitated when he could not find her. For a period of time he held the family hostage, demanding information about Melanie's whereabouts. The Stays told him they did not know where she was. Eventually, Haskell forced all 7 members of the Stay family into a single room. He made them lie face down on the floor. Then, one by one, he shot each of them in the back of the head, execution style. Stephen and Katie were killed. Zach, Rebecca, Emily, and Brian were killed. Cassidy was shot in the head as well. The bullet entered near her hairline and exited through her forehead, fracturing her skull. But Cassidy remained conscious. As she lay on the floor, bleeding from the head wound, she made a decision that would save her life. She played dead. Haskell stood over the bodies, checking to ensure everyone was dead. Cassidy did not move. She did not make a sound. She controlled her breathing and remained completely still, even as blood pooled around her head. Satisfied that the entire family was dead, Haskell left the house. As soon as she heard him leave, Cassidy got up and called 911. Her voice on the recording was calm and clear despite the horror she had just survived. She told the dispatcher what had happened. She described Haskell. She said he was driving a white car and that he was likely on his way to her grandparents' house, where he believed Melanie might be. She gave the dispatcher the address. Then she told them she had been shot in the head, but was okay. Police responded immediately. Cassidy's 911 call had given them everything they needed. They knew the suspect's identity, his vehicle description, and his likely destination. Officers were dispatched to the grandparents' house. Haskell was intercepted and stopped before he could reach them. When police attempted to pull him over, he initially refused. A brief standoff ensued, with Haskell sitting in his car, apparently contemplating his next move. Eventually, he surrendered without further violence. He was taken into custody. Inside the Stay home, first responders found a scene of unspeakable tragedy. Stephen and Katie Stay and their 4 youngest children were dead, shot in the back of the head at close range. Blood was everywhere. The family had been executed, murdered, because of someone else's failed marriage, because a man driven by rage and mental illness had decided his ex-wife's family should pay for whatever grievances he believed he had suffered. Cassidy Stay was transported to the hospital. The bullet wound to her head was serious, but miraculously not fatal. The bullet had entered and exited her skull in such a way that it missed critical brain structures. She required surgery and a lengthy recovery, but she survived. Physically, she would heal. Emotionally and psychologically, she would carry the trauma of watching her entire family murdered in front of her for the rest of her life. Ronald Lee Haskell had a history of mental illness. He reported hearing voices that told him to kill his ex-wife's family. His divorce from Melanie Lyon had been violent and contentious. Court records indicated a pattern of abuse and instability. Melanie had fled, eventually seeking refuge with her sister Katie. Haskell had made threats, but no one anticipated he would carry out a mass execution. The failure to predict or prevent his violence would haunt everyone connected to the case. Haskell was charged with capital murder. Under Texas law, killing multiple people in the same criminal transaction qualifies for the death penalty. Prosecutors announced they would seek execution. The trial began in 2019, 5 years after the murders. The defense argued that Haskell was not guilty by reason of insanity, claiming his mental illness rendered him unable to understand the wrongfulness of his actions. They presented evidence of his psychiatric history, his reports of hearing voices, and his deteriorating mental state in the months leading up to the murders. The prosecution countered that Haskell knew exactly what he was doing. He had disguised himself as a delivery driver to gain entry to the home. He had bound the family members. He had executed them methodically. He had fled the scene. These were not the actions of someone who lacked the capacity to understand right from wrong. These were the actions of a man who was angry, vengeful, and determined to punish his ex-wife by destroying her family. Cassidy Stay testified at the trial. Now 20 years old, she took the stand and recounted the events of that day. She described how Haskell had forced his way into the home, how he had tied them up, how he had shot each member of her family. She testified that she had begged him, "Please don't hurt us." She described playing dead after being shot, lying still while her family bled out around her, waiting for Haskell to leave so she could call for help. Her testimony was powerful and heartbreaking. Jurors openly wept as she spoke. The jury rejected the insanity defense. After deliberating for less than 4 hours, they convicted Haskell of capital murder. The same jury then reconvened for the penalty phase of the trial to determine whether Haskell should receive the death penalty or life in prison. To impose a death sentence, jurors had to find that Haskell would be a future danger to society and that any mitigating factors, such as mental illness, were insufficient to merit a lesser sentence. The defense argued for life in prison. They pointed to Haskell's long history of mental illness, the multiple doctors who had treated him, and the voices he claimed commanded him to kill. They argued that mental illness should be a mitigating factor, that Haskell belonged in a mental health facility, not on death row. The prosecution argued that Haskell's actions demonstrated extreme cruelty and depravity, that he had murdered 6 innocent people, including 4 children, and that he posed an ongoing danger. They called for the death penalty. On October 11, 2019, after deliberating for approximately 4 hours, the jury sentenced Ronald Lee Haskell to death. The decision meant Haskell would be executed by lethal injection, though Texas death penalty cases often involve years or decades of appeals before execution occurs. For Melanie Lyon's family, for Cassidy Stay, the sentence represented a measure of justice, though nothing could bring back Stephen, Katie, Zach, Rebecca, Emily, and Brian. During the sentencing hearing, Cassidy Stay read a victim impact statement. She spoke about forgiveness, about her faith, and about how she was working to heal. She said she had prayed for Haskell and his family. She spoke about the importance of letting go of hurt and anger. Her grace and strength in the face of such trauma impressed everyone in the courtroom. Here was a young woman who had lost her entire immediate family, who had been shot in the head and forced to play dead among their bodies, and she was speaking about forgiveness and moving forward. Cassidy had become a symbol of survival and resilience. In the years since the murders, Cassidy has worked to honor her family's memory. She has spoken publicly about her experience, not to seek attention, but to raise awareness about domestic violence and its devastating reach. The Stay family was not involved in Haskell's marriage. They were simply trying to help Melanie, to provide her with a safe place after she fled an abusive relationship. Their kindness cost them their lives. Cassidy has emphasized that domestic violence does not only harm the individuals directly involved, it spills over, affecting extended family, friends, and innocent bystanders. Stephen and Katie Stay were remembered as devoted parents who loved their children deeply. Stephen worked hard to provide for his family. Katie was actively involved in her children's lives, attending school events and church activities. They opened their home to Katie's sister when she needed help, never imagining that act of compassion would bring a killer to their door. Brian, at 13, was the protective older brother. Emily and Rebecca were bright, energetic girls with their whole lives ahead of them. Zach was only 4 years old, a little boy who barely had a chance to experience life before it was stolen from him. The case highlighted the dangers of domestic violence and the unpredictability of how it can escalate. Melanie Lyon had left an abusive marriage. She had sought safety with her sister. She had done what victims are told to do. She escaped. But her ex-husband's rage followed her. Unable to reach Melanie directly, Haskell targeted her family. He punished them for her decision to leave. The randomness and injustice of it is staggering. The Stay family died because Melanie's marriage failed, because Haskell's mental illness went untreated or inadequately treated, because a system designed to protect victims of domestic violence could not predict or prevent what he would do. Ronald Lee Haskell currently sits on death row in Texas. He continues to appeal his conviction and sentence, arguing various legal issues related to his trial and mental state. Whether he will ever be executed remains to be seen. Texas has an active death penalty system, but appeals can last decades. What is certain is that Haskell will never be free again. He will spend the rest of his life incarcerated, whether on death row or in general population, if his sentence is eventually commuted. Cassidy Stay has rebuilt her life in the years since the murders. She attended college. She has pursued relationships and experiences that her siblings will never have. She has spoken about the importance of finding purpose in suffering, of using her survival to help others. She has become an advocate for victims of violence, a voice for those who did not survive to speak for themselves. Her courage on the day of the murders, her strength during the trial, and her grace in the years since have made her an inspiration to many. The Stay family story is a reminder that violence often has no logic, no fairness, no boundaries. 6 people died because a man they barely knew decided to punish them for his ex-wife's decision to leave him. They were in the wrong place at the wrong time, victims of a rage that had nothing to do with them. Cassidy survived through a combination of quick thinking, courage, and sheer luck. The bullet that struck her head could easily have killed her. The fact that it did not, and that she had the presence of mind to play dead and then immediately call 911, is extraordinary. What stands out about this case is not just the horror of the crime, but the light that emerged from it. Cassidy Stay's survival, her testimony, her forgiveness, and her advocacy have given meaning to an otherwise senseless tragedy. Her family is gone, and nothing can change that. But Cassidy ensures they are remembered not as victims of a madman's rage, but as beloved family members who lived full lives, who loved each other, and who are missed every day. In choosing forgiveness over bitterness, in choosing to speak out rather than retreat into silence, Cassidy Stay has honored her family in the most powerful way possible. She has refused to let their deaths be the final word, and in doing so, she has proven that even in the darkest circumstances, even after the most unspeakable loss, the human spirit can endure, can heal, and can choose hope. These 10 families represent the complete inversion of what family should mean. Whether siblings conspiring to kill, parents systematically torturing their children, or individuals annihilating entire families for personal gain, each case shatters our fundamental assumption that family equals safety. What connects these tragedies isn't a single motive. Greed, fame-seeking, control, rage, and desperation all played roles, but rather the calculated exploitation of family bonds to commit unspeakable evil. Yet amid this darkness, survivors like Cassidy Stay and the Turpin children remind us that courage and resilience can emerge even from the deepest betrayal. Their stories demand we remain vigilant, that we listen when victims cry out, and that we never mistake a family's public face for its private reality. Which case shocked you the most? Did any of these stories challenge what you thought you knew about family violence? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into true crime's most disturbing cases.